promised you the same information another way. This page, page 11 of your handout, and shows you another way to look at transition rates. And again, sort of the idea that once you're 60 days down, you're cooked, I think is very, very important to my analysis, so I'd like to spend a little bit of time on this. What we did is, the bottom part of this got cut off. That's okay, I had the observations going down to March of 2009, and it sort of got cut off in the, I'm sorry, I had the observations going down to September of, no, this is fine, okay. This is the performance of defaulted loans after 12 months. So basically what we did is we looked at borrowers who were 60 days delinquent 12 months ago, that is in March of 2009. We then did a Facebook lookup of each of these loans 1 year later, that is in March of 2010, and said, where are you now? So essentially, how have you performed 1 year after you were 60 days delinquent? And so let's look at the bottom line of this table. 14.3% of these borrowers have been liquidated. 59.4% of these borrowers are still non-performing. That is, they're non-performing 14 months after they were originally non-performing, so it's reasonable to assume they're dead at this point. Reperformers, 6.5%. Voluntarily prepaid, 0.2%. Liquidated, modified and liquidated, 0.5%. Non-performing, modified, 5.6%. Modified, reperforming, 13.5%. Total, 100%. So out of the borrowers that went 60 days delinquent 1 year ago, only 20% of them are still alive. That is, they were either reperforming and not modified, voluntarily prepaid and not modified, reperforming and modified, or voluntarily prepaid and modified. 20% of them are still alive 1 year later, and these mortgages still have 27 years to run. So that sort of gives credence to the 7% cure rate once you're 60 days down.
So is that based on the whole performance data set?
That is based on the loan performance securitized data set.
All of the data?
All of the data. Now the interesting thing is it is not markedly different for prime than it is for subprime. The only difference is you have a lot fewer observations.
So you're saying is that most of those could pay, but they chose not to. It's on purpose not to pay.
I'm actually a fan of the dual triggers. I mean, you stretch to buy your home. It was a stretch. It's hard to make the payments, and then you're underwater, and anything happens to you, and you just stop paying. Yes, a certain number of borrowers will just stop paying, even though they can afford to pay. But for many borrowers, there's also a trigger. And to some extent, I'm less, everyone says, well, gee, strategic defaults are X%. I don't know actually how you define a strategic default in a manner that makes sense, because there's a large optional element to whether you continue to pay or not. I mean, if you're stretched, you can, if you're stretched and your home has equity, you find a way to continue to pay, or you just sell your home. If your home doesn't have equity and you're 50 points underwater, you're going to walk. So, I tend to dislike the, well, we can afford to pay, and besides, there is actually no good, your income information from the, in the non-securitized world, in the securitized world is really, really bad. Because I can use debt to income to try to figure out if a guy can afford to pay or not. But remember, the problem with these loans is that in most cases, they provided limited documentation and they probably lied to begin with. So to use that income information to figure out if they can afford to pay just seems silly to me.
So actually, most of these people are, on top of everything else, are getting free rent. If they were foreclosed, they'd have to pay rent. So the incentive system is completely skewed.
Yes, thank you. Page 8. It takes a long time to get borrowers out of their home. Liquidation lags have extended tremendously. And you can see here that the liquidation liquidation lag, on average, the blue line on the left-hand side of the page, over the last 18 months, your liquidation lag, that is your time from when you initially stop making your mortgage payments to the time you're liquidated, on average has gone from about 15 months to about 19 months.
What
But it's
page is that?
page 8, I'm sorry. But you'll also notice that, that's clearly not uniform across the country. Judicial states are much slower liquidators than non-judicial states. Owner-occupied properties liquidate much more slowly than non-owner-occupied properties. So you can see that out of those mortgages that have liquidated fairly recently, about 22% have been able to live in their home rent-free for more than 2 years. And remember, we're only doing the liquidators. We're not doing the guys that have been sitting in the liquidation pipeline for 3 years and not paying. And there are a large number of those.
I'd be curious that there are some originators who seem to specialize in subprime or Alt-A, and then is the backlog concentrated in those guys who are the chief originators, or are the lags, say, more evenly distributed through the servicers?
There are some servicers that are slower liquidators than others, but all servicers have slowed down their liquidation pipelines tremendously. And a lot of it is, foreclosure moratoriums, and many, first at the federal level and then at various state levels. It's the HAMP program that says before you can foreclose on a borrower, you're strongly encouraged, and as of June 1st required, to see if he's eligible for a modification. If he is, and you offer him one, and he accepts it, even if he doesn't make a single payment, you still have to leave him in the program for 3 months. In judicial states, you need a court order. Things are so backlogged that it's taking forever. I mean, you look at the liquidation rates in Florida, they're alarmingly low. So it's sort of a combination of factors. And yes, I mean, every servicer has slowed down considerably. If you sort of want to know the slowest liquidators in countrywide across all products, and B of A on their legacy loans are very slow compared to other originators, but it's a system-wide problem. Do you want to move?
Yeah,
Why don't we?
Because we'll have time for questions after.
The result of this is shown on page 9. Given the foreclosure moratoriums, the testing for HAMP, etc., your non-performing to foreclosure roll rate has gone down considerably. Your foreclosure to REO roll rate, which is the red line on the left-hand side of the page, has gone down considerably. Meanwhile, because home prices have stabilized, the REO to liquidation roll rate has gone up, which is the green line. The result of that is REO supply is about half of what it was at the peak in the private label securitized world. So people look and say, well, gee, there's not much in the REO bucket. That's right, there's not much in the REO bucket because it's stuffed further back in the pipeline. It's in the 90-day plus foreclosure bucket. And this bucket has swelled far more than the REO bucket has gone down.
What is the REO?
Oh, real estate owned. So the real estate owned bucket is way down, but the 90-day to foreclosure bucket is way up. Now, it's important. Now, these numbers were taken from the private label securitized world, and obviously the private label securitized world is not the total picture. So page 10 sort of shows you what the total picture looks like for the mortgage market. Agency MBS is about $5.5 billion. The private label universe is about, $5.5 trillion. The private label universe is about $1.5 trillion. Unsecuritized first liens and bank portfolios are about $3 trillion, and unsecuritized second liens is about $1 trillion. So that sort of gives you. So when you look at the 11 trillion Fed flow of funds numbers for the size of the U.S. mortgage market, that's basically how it's broken down. So we're looking at $1 trillion. So some of our analysis is looking at $1.5 trillion of extremely adversely selected loans. But even so, a lot of the lessons that you learn from this private label world or the securitized world are more generally applicable across the entire universe. Before we look at the entire